What's up everyone, Michael Taylor at 64 Motorsport. Interesting video for you today. I'm going to give a run through in terms of what I experienced when I bought my E46 BMW. The problems that I faced and the issues that I had with it shortly after I purchased it. So the point of this video is to give you an insight in terms of what I went through, and by doing so help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made and give you an opportunity to have a closer look at your potential E46 purchase and make sure it's everything it's been made out to be. Because trust me, there's nothing worse than having to spend a heap of coin out of your performance upgrades budget just to get it back to normal so that you've got a solid starting base to work from. It set me back a good 12 months in terms of my upgrade plans, and it wasn't very pleasant. I'm going to share my experiences with you guys so that you can learn from that and hopefully have a better buying experience than what I did. I'm going to get this camera onto the tripod, sit myself down, and we'll have a bit of a chin wag. Let's get started, and a bit of a backstory. I bought the car privately and I'd seen it for sale and I'd sort of kept an eye on it and it was still there after a couple of weeks. And eventually my wife said, look, I can tell you really want it. Why don't you give him a ring and go have a look at it? And that's what I did. Before I went to have a look at it, I set up a couple of late nights on the computer doing as much research as I could to give me an idea in terms of what type of things I should be looking for. But I just wanted to get some information about problems specifically with the E46. Usual suspects came up, yeah, oil leaks and coolant leaks and where those leaks were and things like that. So when I went to have a look at it, I was not only looking at the stuff that I was already conscious of and was used to looking for, but also looking for those specific problems. These photos here were taken maybe a few weeks after I bought it, so maybe the second or third wash. And so you can see overall it presents extremely well. It had nice CSL wheels on it and it had been lowered and not much other than that. So I knew it hadn't been sort of mucked around with too much, so that was a bit of a tick. And then, the interior was in good condition apart from the usual sort of wear in the leather over the bolster on the driver's seat. Paint was in good condition. The clear coat was still in good nick. So it presented extremely well, and I popped the bonnet and had a look under there, and it looked like a 15-year-old engine bay. It wasn't like super shiny like it had been majorly detailed or anything, but it was clean. There wasn't any oil or grease around. Took it for a test drive and it drove pretty well. Smooth gear changes. Got it back after a 15-minute test drive. Still no signs of oil, and there was no sort of coolant leaks. It came with a roadworthy certificate, which here in Australia is where a mechanic looks over it and looks at all the brakes, tyres, suspension, oil leaks, all that sort of thing, make sure it's in good nick. And according to the logbook, it was being serviced every 15,000 kilometres, so as per the logbook. So mechanically it looked alright and it was ticking boxes in terms of its service history. So yeah, we were able to negotiate a price and I bought it, and I was absolutely wrapped. Felt like a king driving home in my first ever BMW. All good, thumbs up. That excitement soon faded because within a month the problem started. And I don't like to think badly of people. I don't think I was deliberately misled, but the more I sort of looked into it on some of the issues, I think I was. Started to have some coolant leaks. Engine started to run a little bit hot. It wasn't like cooking, but it was just sitting a little bit higher than it should on the gauge. Rather than just sort of replacing one piece at a time, I'll jump online and I'll buy a coolant refresh kit. So basically water pump, all the hoses, expansion tank, new coolant, thermostat, all that sort of stuff. It all came in a kit, so I was armed and ready to replace it. The first moment where I was a little bit concerned and sort of questioning what was going on was when I took the airbox out and I removed the air filter, and it was actually, there was I think spider webs in it, and this was meant to be a car that had been serviced within 6 weeks. So what sort of service do you get done where they don't even either replace the air filter or at least take it out and clean it? There were leaves and dust and, as I say, spider webs in it. So obviously that hadn't been removed in some time. So I had a bit of a digging around in terms of the service history, and it turns out what they were doing was, yes, they were getting a service, but they weren't using somebody who was familiar with BMWs. It was just like a regular mechanic who serviced Toyotas and Fords and Mazdas and BMWs. Whoever bought a car in, they'd service it as per the logbook. But they weren't even doing that properly. That was the first sort of alarm bell that went off, and then I replaced all those, and then when I took the water pump off to replace it, there was just like a heap of silicone all around it. And I'm thinking, well, this is weird because it's meant to seal on an O-ring. You shouldn't need silicone. That to me is a sign that they've had a coolant leak, and rather than replace and pull it out, they've just plastered a heap of silicone around it to stop it from leaking. So I don't know whether that's happened during the service or whether that's been done as part of instructions from the previous owner to hide a fault. I mean, I wasn't too concerned in as much that I was putting a new water pump on which had a new O-ring on it, but it was like half an hour, 45 minutes work just cleaning all this sealant off. When you're looking at my earlier videos and I'm harping on about maintenance and getting this right before you do anything else, it all stems pretty much from my experience. Even though the logbook might say that it's been serviced, you don't know the quality of the mechanic that's been doing the servicing unless it was being serviced at an actual BMW dealership, which for a 15-year-old car is highly unlikely because at that stage people just want to get it serviced. They're worried about their oil change and filter changes and all that sort of stuff and don't want the expense of a BMW premium. I was understanding that they weren't using BMW, but they weren't at least using somebody who knew what they were meant to be doing, and that's where it sort of led to some problems. So anyway, I got all that changed, and that's like a day's work of my time and a few $100s, which a few $100 is basically what? New pod filter intake. Straight away, that's been put on the back burner. Anyway, I get that sorted, and sure enough, a few weeks later, start smelling oil. It didn't look like that the valve cover was leaking, but certainly there was a lot of oil dripping down, so that pretty much led me to the oil filter housing. Oil filter housing had to come out and put a new gasket in there, and I replaced the Vanos feed line at the same time, and I replaced the dipstick O-ring while I was fiddling around in there. Then you got to put 7 litres of oil in, new oil filter, so $10 gasket and $120 worth of oil and filters. There's another thing off my list, so there goes my, what's that? Short shift kit, I guess, gets put on the back burner. But eventually the valve cover gasket had to be done, and I'm still getting oil leaks, so that was pretty much the oil pan gasket. Just get all that done, and I'm coming home from work, and I come out of a roundabout in second gear and floor it, and it just, I could just tell by the way the engine was revving and the way it was moving forward that the clutch was starting to slip. You just sort of get that sense that the revs don't seem to match the pushback in the seat, if you know what I mean. Where I was living at the time, I had no garage or anything like that. Just a driveway which was on a hill, so I couldn't get gearbox out myself, so I had to take it to a mechanic. Took it to a BMW specialist. Fortunately, the flywheel was still in good nick, so we only had to replace the clutch pressure plate sort of thing, and he also did replace the diff bushes while I was fiddling around in there, and guibo and that sort of thing. So we got all that sorted out, but that was still a $1,500 exercise. So there goes my exhaust system on the back burner. And then the front brakes started having issues with that. New set of rotors for the front, $100, so there's something else. When I was putting in new sway bar end links, what they'd done when they'd lowered the car was they'd simply put in new springs, and it was still the original Sachs struts or shockies, and of course, and now the bump stops were starting to decay, and it just blows my mind why you'd put in a new set of springs and lower it to a heavier duty spring and then keep the original struts, why you wouldn't replace those, and the bushes and all that sort of thing. So as I say, I don't like to think badly of somebody and that they would deliberately go out of their way to deceive a new buyer, but every indication I had was that whoever was working on the car either didn't care, or they didn't know, or they were trying to do it in a way to avoid somebody looking further into the mechanical condition of it and just sort of sign off on it. Cleaning all the oil with a pressure washer underneath the car so you remove all the signs of oil leaks and things like that. I mean, that's can only be read one way as far as I'm concerned. What I want you guys to take out of this is, regardless of what condition the car is in when you buy it and what the service history is, there are certain maintenance items that I would strongly suggest that you budget for when you first buy the car. So if the car's going to cost you, I don't know, pick a number, $5,000. Set aside another $1,000 or $1,500 or whatever you can to start doing these basic maintenance, and I would certainly do a full refresh kit on the coolant system, because that's the area which is going to cause you the most grief. You'll be on your way to work, engine starts to overheat, you cook the motor or whatever, and set aside money to get that done. Set aside money that at some point in the first 12 months of ownership you're going to need to replace your valve cover, oil filter housing gasket, oil pan gasket, probably CCV. Even if you buy a car with really low mileage on it, the fact is that the car is now almost 20 years old, and rubber doesn't last forever, and it's going to wear out, it's going to deteriorate, it's going to lose its sealing capacities, which means you're going to have oil leaks and you're going to have coolant leaks. These are the sort of maintenance items in an old car that I would strongly encourage you to set aside coin for, so that you can get to enjoy driving the car without having headaches or feeling disillusioned with your purchase. Because trust me, if you buy an E46 and you maintain it and it's been maintained and you look after it, there's no better driving pleasure than what you'll get from the car. You can't stick your head in the sand and just expect, oh, it's low mileage, it's had logbook servicing, so I can drive this for another year before I have to deal with that. Nah, within that first year, I can guarantee you're going to have to fix some of these problems. And if you're proactive about it and you plan and you budget it, it's going to save you a lot of grief. It's going to save you grief in terms of getting stuck on the side of the road, and it's going to save you grief in terms of it causing more extensive damage than what it should have been. So that's my advice. I really hope you got something out of it, and it gave you a bit of an indication in terms of the sort of things to look for when you're buying your first E46. And even if it looks good, just keep in your back of your mind that, you know what, this is probably going to need replacing within 6 months anyway. So if you've got any questions in terms of what I've experienced, or if you've been through a similar experience or a better experience, please post a comment below so that we can share it with all the other viewers and give them an insight in terms of what it's like to buy your first E46 and how enjoyable it is, and some of the pitfalls or some of the things that you need to watch out for when you are buying it. And that way we can all benefit by sharing the information with everybody. You can help me out on my channel too by giving me a thumbs up if you've liked the video, and if you haven't liked the video, it also helps me out if you give me a thumbs down. So either way, hit one of those buttons please, and until we meet again, look after yourselves, stay safe. TTFN.